Ever get the feeling like, things aren't what they seem? Like there's something else going on beneath the surface.
Yeah.
That's Hitchcock's Rope in a nutshell.
Oh, absolutely.
And we are diving deep into this film, folks.
It's a fascinating one.
It really is, because it's not just a stylish thriller, which it definitely is, but it's also a commentary on, like, hidden desires, the facades we create.
Right.
The darkness that can lurk beneath even the most seemingly perfect surfaces.
Exactly.
And we've got a ton to unpack. We've got articles, we've got film history, deep cuts. We even have some juicy tidbits from the screenwriter himself.
Oh, wow.
Get ready for some serious aha moments, because
I'm ready.
this one's a doozy.
What's fascinating about Rope is how Hitchcock uses this, like, seemingly simple murder mystery to tackle such complex, like really complex themes. He weaves together ideas of guilt, repression, social critique, all within this very confined space.
Yeah.
Because, it's all taking place essentially in one apartment.
It's a bottle episode before bottle episodes were like a thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's shot to look like one continuous take.
You heard that right. One continuous shot. Now, this was Hitchcock's first color film, and the story goes he wasn't initially sold on the technology, but boy, oh boy, did he use it deliberately.
Oh, yeah.
Just imagine this. Two guys, Brandon and Philip, they commit a murder, they stuff their friend in a chest, and then they host a dinner party.
Right.
Using that chest as the serving table.
Dark. So dark.
Talk about a recipe for disaster.
And Hitchcock, always the master of suspense, he heightens that tension so well.
Oh, yeah.
Because he's constantly reminding us, the viewers, of that hidden body. It's like he's letting us in on this dark, twisted secret.
Yes. It's that dramatic irony, like we know something the characters don't.
Exactly. He makes us complicit almost.
We're right there in the room with them, and it's so effective. Okay, but before we get too deep into all that delicious tension, let's back up for a second and talk about the source material.
Okay.
Because this wasn't just some random thriller plot that Hitchcock dreamed up.
Right, it's based on.
This was inspired by a real-life case, the Leopold and Loeb case.
Yes, fascinating case.
Two students who committed a murder just to prove that they were, like, above conventional morality.
Above the law.
Above the law.
They thought.
Which is, talk about chilling.
Absolutely. And that element of intellectual arrogance it's key to understanding Rope and what Hitchcock was doing.
Yeah.
Brandon and Philip, the two murderers in the film, they are obsessed with this idea of the Superman, Nietzsche. And they believe that their intellect somehow justifies their actions.
Which makes you wonder, right? Was Hitchcock, like, subtly critiquing a certain type of intellectual elitism, this belief that some people are just above the rules?
It's a theme that's...
It's so relevant.
Still relevant today. Absolutely. But remember, this was 1948, right after World War II.
Yeah.
Society was grappling with the aftermath of that. And there was this underlying anxiety about the potential for darkness, even within people who seem civilized.
Oh, for sure.
And Hitchcock, he taps into that fear brilliantly.
He does. And speaking of things that tap into our fears, can we talk about Hitchcock's use of food and eating in this film?
Oh, yeah.
Because, imagine unknowingly making small talk, having dinner,
right,
while eating over a dead body. The symbolism there is so thick you could cut it with a knife.
It's more than sustenance, right?
Right.
It's about desire. It's about repression, secrets. And in this case, I think, maybe even consuming something taboo.
Ooh.
Remember that recurring motif of cannibalism throughout the film?
Yes.
Metaphorically speaking, of course.
Yes.
It's as if they're unknowingly, like, consuming their anxieties.
Whoa.
Their darkest impulses right along with that meal.
Now that is an image I won't soon forget. But you know what else adds to the tension in this film?
What's that?
Mrs. Wilson.
Ah, yes, the housekeeper.
The housekeeper. She's constantly on the verge of discovering the body. It's like every time she enters the room, the audience is like, no, don't open that chest. Don't do it.
It's classic Hitchcock, though.
Oh, it is?
That masterful manipulation of the audience's emotions, the blocking, the dialogue, even just like the placement of objects. He's so good at keeping us in that state of what's going to happen next.
The master of suspense. It's like we're right there with them, kind of, peeking over their shoulders, waiting for that moment where everything unravels.
Right, and knowing it's going to happen.
Exactly. And that brings us to another layer of Rope, that Hitchcock handles with, his signature subtlety, and that is the homosexual subtext.
Yeah. We have to remember this is 1948.
Oh, yeah.
This wasn't Hollywood was not known for being open-minded back then.
Not exactly a bastion of progressive values, no.
Exactly. I mean, this is the era of the Hays Code, which, for people who might not know, that was basically Hollywood's censorship system.
Right, like you couldn't even show a married couple in bed together unless they had, like, one foot on the floor.
Right. It was crazy. And any hint of homosexuality, I mean, forget it. It had to be implied, never explicitly stated.
Right. And so Hitchcock, being the master of suggestion that he was,
Oh, yes.
found ways to kind of weave that into the fabric of the film.
Absolutely.
And it starts really with the question that kind of hangs over this entire film: were Brandon and Philip lovers? Even Arthur Lawrence, the screenwriter, he later said, quote, "I thought it was apparent." But back then, again, you couldn't just come right out and say it.
No, you had to kind of speak in code.
Exactly. So Hitchcock uses these little clues, these moments of like double entendre and suggestive visuals.
Right. It's all about the subtext.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So like take, for instance, that scene where Janet, the victim's fiance, she tells Brandon, "I could strangle you."
Oh, yeah.
Which, if you think about it,
That's a very loaded statement.
it's very loaded, especially considering
I mean,
how he actually died.
exactly.
It sends chills down your spine.
It's
I've seen this film multiple times, and I never caught that connection before.
right.
And, another thing she keeps doing, she keeps calling Brandon and Philip chums.
Chums.
Right. Which, on the surface seems innocent enough.
It does. It sounds very
Like, oh, they're just good pals.
buddies. Yeah, pals.
But back then, that term, it had some pretty loaded connotations.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
It's almost like she knows more than she's letting on.
Like she's in on their secret,
Right.
or at least suspicious.
Yes, exactly. And, speaking of being in the know, let's talk about Hitchcock's, famous single shot technique.
Okay, yeah.
Because, he really wanted the audience to feel like they were watching a play unfold in real time.
In real time, yeah.
But he had to get a little creative with those cuts.
Oh, yeah.
Because there are cuts in the film, right?
There are. It's not actually one take.
It's not actually a single shot.
No. Movie magic.
Exactly. But they're so cleverly hidden. They're hidden by, like, panning to dark surfaces, like a character's back or that infamous chest.
Of course, yeah.
He even used things like, a waiter's jacket passing in front of the camera.
Yeah, that's right. They thought of everything.
To mask the edits,
It's pretty remarkable.
It really is, and it creates this sense that we are, like, it's almost like he's playing with our perception of reality, right?
Yeah, blurring those lines a little bit.
Blurring the lines between what's real and what's, cleverly constructed.
Exactly, which I think connects to what we were talking about earlier.
Oh, yeah, totally.
This idea of control, which is so central to the film. Because just like Hitchcock meticulously crafted this illusion of a single take, Brandon and Philip are desperately trying to control their narrative.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Maintain this facade, keep their horrific secret hidden from their guests. And so that manipulation of reality in the filmmaking, it directly ties into those themes, I think.
It's so true. And it makes you think about, like, how much of our own lives are just carefully constructed narratives.
Oh, it does. It makes you wonder.
Right. Like, what are we hiding? Anyway, not to get too philosophical, but
it's there.
It's definitely there. And all of that brings us to, of course, James Stewart.
Yes.
Rupert Cadell.
The one and only.
He's the one who ultimately, kind of untangles this whole web of lies.
Right. He sees through it all.
He does. But he's a pretty complex character himself, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Rupert is a fascinating study in contradictions.
Oh, tell me more.
Well, he's a former teacher, right?
Right.
And we learned that he actually instilled in Brandon and Philip this dangerous philosophy of intellectual superiority.
Oh, wow. So it's like...
He even jokes about murder being an art at one point, right?
Oh, my gosh, that's right. Yeah.
So it's like he's partly responsible. He kind of planted the seed that led to this whole horrific act.
And the irony is not lost on us, right? Especially when, like, Brandon, right before he opens the chest, he tells Rupert, "I hope you like what you see."
Oof, yeah.
You can just, like, feel the weight of Rupert's guilt and disgust in that moment.
Yeah, and just like, is he disgusted by them, or is it like,
Is it self-hatred almost?
Right. Is it like he sees a twisted reflection of himself in what they've done?
Exactly, yeah.
And it's like, again, this was a time when homosexuality was like deeply taboo.
Oh, absolutely. So Hitchcock, he can't, explicitly say anything,
Right.
but he uses these like subtle cues to suggest that maybe Rupert is grappling with his own, internalized homophobia even.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes Rupert such a fascinating character, because it's like, on the one hand, he's clearly horrified by this murder.
Right.
But on the other hand, there's this sense that maybe he's not entirely repulsed by Brandon and Philip.
Right.
Like there's this weird kind of admiration almost.
They're very complex.
It's very complex. And I think that's what Hitchcock does so well.
Yeah.
He doesn't give us easy answers.
No.
He wants us to sit with that discomfort.
Right.
To really think about the character's motivations and, and our own reactions to them.
It's like he's holding up a mirror to society in a way and forcing us to confront these uncomfortable truths about ourselves, about our prejudices.
And about the things that we might find titillating, even if we don't want to admit it.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. Like that scene where Brandon opens the chest and we don't actually see the body, right?
Right.
But Hitchcock, he frames the shot in a way that, like, it's almost suggestive.
Yes.
Like, we're not supposed to see what's inside, but he wants us to think about it.
Exactly. He wants us to imagine it.
To use our imaginations, yes.
Which is, I think, even more effective than actually showing us the body.
Oh, totally. And that ending, oh my gosh.
Talk about an ending.
Rupert firing that gun out the window.
Shattering the silence.
Right. It's like this huge release of tension after all this buildup.
Right. Like this pressure valve just explodes.
Yes, exactly. What do you make of that final act of violence? Because it's interesting, right? Rupert, he's a publisher.
He's a man of words.
Right. He's a man of ideas.
Yeah.
And yet he chooses to end this whole thing with this like very decisive violent act.
It's almost like he's rejecting intellect in that moment.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Like he's rejecting the very philosophy that he instilled in Brandon and Philip.
Oh, wow.
He's choosing action over these abstract ideas.
Right.
And I think it speaks to the limitations of language,
Oh, yeah.
Like sometimes words aren't enough.
Wow, that's a really good point. Like there's no reasoning with this kind of evil.
Exactly.
And maybe Rupert realizes that in that moment.
I think so.
Wow. This is making me rethink the whole film.
That's the beauty of Hitchcock, though, isn't it?
It is.
He makes us think. He makes us question.
And he's not afraid to leave us with more questions than answers.
Exactly. And Rope, I mean, it's a masterclass in suspense, but it's so much more than that.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a film that stays with you long after you've seen it.
It really does. And, I think it's a testament to Hitchcock's genius that we're still talking about it, all these years later.
Absolutely.
So as we kind of, tie a bow on this whole conversation, what is the one thing you want our listeners to take away from this deep dive into Rope?
I think, more than anything, Rope reminds us that things aren't always what they seem. That we should always be questioning, always be looking beneath the surface.
Because you never know what you might find lurking there.
Exactly.
Ooh, spooky. Well, on that note, we'll leave you with this final thought. Imagine if Rope were made today.
Ooh. Good question.
Right. Would it be as impactful? Would we still be, so captivated by it?
Right. Without that Hays Code, without all those restrictions.
Exactly. Something to think about. And with that, we'll say goodbye. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into Hitchcock's Rope.
Thanks for having me.